Okay, so as you guys know, for the last couple of years, me and Steph have been deep into our investing journeys. And one of the main things that you probably noticed dating back to when we first started talking about money is the fact that we use different investment platforms. Steph's been using Wealthsimple while I've been using Questrade, both of which are really great platforms, especially when you're looking to escape some of the crazy fees that some of the other platforms have. And they're also really great for beginners and all the way up to the more experienced investors. Now, with that being said, I've recently made the decision to switch from Questrade, which I've been using for the past couple of years, to Wealthsimple, basically joining Steph. Now, before anyone freaks out, there isn't anything to be concerned about, especially for someone who's currently using Questrade. Like I said before, both platforms are really, really great, but there is a reason behind this switch. Now, before I even get into that, I do want to first say that this is actually a question that we get asked all the time, with people saying things like, why do you guys use different investment platforms? And what's interesting is that a lot of people assume that it's because one platform is either better than the other, or more complicated, or something than the other. But that's actually not why. See, initially when we first started making content and documenting our journeys, I would say that me and Steph were just in different stages from each other from an investing confidence perspective. I would say that Steph earlier on wasn't as confident as she is now, which to be fair makes a lot of sense. And I also think that a lot of us can actually relate to that, because when you're first being introduced to a topic that you know is important, the last thing you want to do is mess things up or do something wrong. Now for me, I felt pretty confident mainly because I had already looked into investing, but also because I felt like I had to be. See, I feel like when you're the oldest kid or you're the firstborn kid, especially coming from an immigrant family, there's a lot of trial and error or just you having to figure stuff out on your own. So even from a knowledge perspective, I knew that there was a lot for me to learn and a lot that I wanted to learn, but I really leaned into it and I knew that I wanted to build a great long-term investment portfolio. Anyways, all this is to say that even though we started off with different investment platforms, the day has finally come for me to switch platforms. But before you guys even give us your thoughts and, anything else, let's first talk about how we actually got to this point. So if we go back to early 2021, when I was first starting to invest, and by the way, this is right after I just paid off about $50,000 in student loan debt, the state of the investing world had just gone through massive change, at least here in North America. And listen, we've said this time and time again, but for a really long time, the big financial institutions basically ran everything, like the entire investing industry. And they honestly just didn't offer customers real and competitive options and value when it came to things like everyday banking. So think anywhere from checking and savings accounts to even investing options. We're talking about a lot of high fees and a lack of transparency around how your money was actually being managed. Now, all of this had been happening in the background for decades on decades, and is what really set the stage for this huge revolution where we saw millions of people who had either been on the sidelines, so opting to not invest for whatever reason, or people who were just tired of the status quo, join this new movement of these new discount brokerages. Basically, we're talking about platforms whose fee structures didn't depend on them charging you for every little thing in order for them to make money. Now, me and Steph thought really long and hard about what we wanted to do with our money, especially because up until that point, we had only been with one bank our entire lives. So similar to so many other people, it can sometimes be really hard to let go, especially when you haven't asked yourself why something is the way it is. For example, when Steph opened up her very first investment account, her and her mom walked into the bank and an investment advisor set her up with $25 a month going towards mutual funds. And by the way, she could have totally afforded to put more than that towards her investments, but that's for another story. Basically, there wasn't any education on why she should go with mutual funds or why the advisor randomly chose $25 a month. I feel like this is one of the very first interactions where you're told to just trust the process. And it's also a turning point where even if you don't realize it at the time, it's one of those things where you start to realize slowly that everyone else around you doesn't know more than you, even the person at your local bank. Even for me, I grew up with my dad constantly talking about how one specific bank was better than pretty much every other bank out there, despite the fact that they charged you a monthly fee to keep your money at their bank. By the way, banks don't actually just keep your money sitting there. They put it to work by either investing it or loaning it out. So in theory, they should actually be paying you to keep your money at their bank, especially when there's other banking options out there. Shout out to no-fee checking accounts and high-interest savings accounts. Anyways, at the time, after doing a lot of research research into all the different platforms, we realized that Wealthsimple, who was new to the game, and Questrade, who had been around for over 2 decades, had a couple things in common, and then there were some areas where one was slightly better than the other. Also, keep in mind that this is going back to 2021. So let's start with Wealthsimple. This platform's biggest selling point was the simple fact that it was simple. It was simple to use. It had a fantastic user-friendly interface that literally anyone could start using and navigating without any confusion. And on top of that, it was affordable, which is a big one. Overall, it seemed like a really cool platform, and it was really starting to solidify itself in the marketplace. Now, at the time, Wealthsimple's biggest focus was on their robo-advisor, otherwise known as Wealthsimple Invest or investing on autopilot. The idea behind this product was actually super clear and simple. Basically, you would fund your account, of which you could actually set up auto deposits to make it really, really simple. And then you would just sit back and watch as your money was invested for you by an algorithm who would curate a portfolio of ETFs based on a risk tolerance test. And then it would actually just manage it for you, ideally for the long term. Now, they were offering this product for a fraction of what other managed products were, and with better investments. Now, what I mean by this is that banks typically offer mutual funds that cost an average of 2% a year in fees, whereas Wealthsimple Invest was only 0.5% a year in fees. And as you can imagine, that's a really, really big difference. Anyways, alongside millions of others, this is what Steph ended up going with, given everything that I just mentioned. Plus, they made the process just so easy. You didn't have to go to a physical building to fill out any paperwork. You could just download the app, or you could hop on their website on your desktop and do that and just sign up within minutes. I also feel like focusing on beginner investors was a huge power move because beginner investors are typically the most neglected. And not only was this a beginner-friendly product with beginner-friendly branding, but they also had a lot of educational resources that explain things in a very simple way. Now, Questrade, on the other hand, was one of the fastest growing online brokerages pre-2020. They had basically broken the mold by offering a more cost-effective product to customers before there were even any other similar competitors in the space. I would actually say that Questrade catered more toward the DIY investor. I wouldn't even describe them as the more experienced investor, despite the fact that they do attract those investors as well. But I would say that they catered more toward the people who, had a better idea of what they wanted and felt comfortable managing their own portfolio, as opposed to, actually paying someone to do it for them. One of the big differences with Questrade right off the bat was that there was and still is a slight barrier to entry. In order to open up a Questrade account, you have to first fund your account with at least $250. Now, by the way, it used to be $1,000 back when I first opened my account. Now, as you can imagine, there are a lot of people who begin their investing journeys with only a few dollars and don't have $1,000 just like that. But even with that being said, Questrade's fee structure does still beat the majority of financial institutions in that it's free to buy ETFs and it's only 1 cent for every share that you buy, but you have to keep in mind that there are minimums with stock purchases. Now, as someone who's primarily interested in buying ETFs, to me, the free purchases were just a no-brainer, and Questrade, at least at the time, had certain features that Wealthsimple just didn't have yet. So for example, with Wealthsimple, if I was gonna buy a US listed stock or ETF, I would need US dollars in order to make that happen. So no problem. They would just take your money, they would convert it, they would take their little fee in order to make that happen, that conversion, and then boom, you own that investment. However, if you wanted to sell that investment, what would happen to the money that you got from the sale? Remember, the money should be in USD because it was a USD investment. Well, at the time, if you were using Wealthsimple, their accounts weren't multi-currency. So what would happen is that as soon as you sold your investment and you got the proceeds from that investment in US dollars, they would automatically convert that money back to CAD, meaning you would actually be paying fees to convert that money on the buy and on the sale, which honestly is just super unnecessary, and it means that you're paying more in fees. On top of things like that, Questrade was also very intriguing to what I'll call higher risk investors, mainly because they had every account that you could think of, including margin accounts for anyone who wanted to use borrowed money or debt to invest, and they even had options trading, which became really popular during that initial investing wave between 2020 to 2022. Now, those features didn't intrigue me, but I was comfortable using Questrade's platform, even though it was a little bit more complicated from a visual standpoint, and I like the lower fees. On the topic of how the platform looked, and honestly still looks, the reality of the user interface was that it matched a more complicated set of features, where unlike Wealthsimple, who, given the clientele they were looking for, tried to keep things more straightforward, Questrade, on the other hand, was still a bit more daunting to your everyday regular investor. Anyways, I ended up opening an account with Questrade and beginning my investor journey there. Now, everything that we've been covering up until this point has obviously been very platform specific, but the real reason why me and Steph decided to go with separate platforms is honestly because we wanted to show you guys the difference between the two. At the end of the day, I know for me, whenever I'm looking for something online, it's always great when you have different examples that can speak to different people. It honestly really changes the game. Like, there's so many different features and accounts that I had earlier on that Steph didn't have, or even the changes that have been made to the Questrade app over time that I have been asking for years, that we honestly only noticed or even recognized mainly because we were using different apps. Ultimately, we thought that you guys would appreciate seeing more than one platform being used, and now that I look back on it, it's actually made for some pretty cool videos and comparisons so far. But to clarify, the reason that we went with two different platforms was ultimately to show you guys the two different platforms, or to show you guys both. Now, the reason that I went with Questrade, whereas Steph went with Wealthsimple, was because she liked Wealthsimple's more simple interface. Now, the real question remains: why am I moving over to Wealthsimple? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. I like their app too. I know that sounds kind of funny, but their user interface is honestly just so straightforward. And despite the fact that Questrade actually has a new and improved app as of recently, after using Steph's app and just seeing it firsthand, it's just too smooth. Steph also switched recently to only using Wealthsimple Trade, which is their DIY platform. So she's no longer using Wealthsimple Invest. And we've seen firsthand just some of the different updates or changes that they've made to that platform too. Like, now you can also set up automatic purchases into investments like specific ETFs, which is super clutch. And they also have automatic dividend reinvestments. Basically, they've fully automated the idea of also being a DIY investor, which, if you think about it, actually helps you out a ton. You know, I'll also add to that. Now that me and Steph have narrowed in on our simple investing strategy, we don't really need access to all this extra stuff. Like, you know, for example, like I don't need to have access to a margin account, FX trading, and more. Now, Wealthsimple also has a lot of these features now, but honestly, I feel like it's their app alone that really sets them apart from a lot of these other platforms. Now, I will say, they also have commission-free trading, like completely commission-free. So, for example, when me and Steph are buying XCQT, we don't have to worry about having to pay ECN fees, which are basically these tiny little fees that most financial institutions, including Questrade, charge in order for you to purchase that investment. So, for anyone who doesn't know, they're basically service fees for executing a trade. Now, they are really, really small, but why pay for them if you don't have to? But yeah, there you have it. That's honestly why I'm switching. Now, the last thing I want to add is, for anyone who's thinking of using Questrade or is currently using Questrade, there is honestly no reason for you to switch unless you prefer Wealthsimple over Questrade for whatever reason, like I mentioned. Both Questrade and Wealthsimple are fantastic platforms that offer a much better and honestly much cheaper product than a lot of the other platforms out there, and they're also our go-to platforms that we'd recommend. With that being said, there's still a few differences between the two platforms. So, for example, with Wealthsimple, if you're someone who regularly buys US stocks or US ETFs, well, you can actually have access to a USD account for $10 a month, which, depending on how much you normally pay in foreign exchange fees, that could be worth it or it might not be worth it. But you should also keep in mind that once you reach premium status with Wealthsimple, you actually get that feature for free. So, food for thought. Now, on the flip side, if you're someone who's planning on leaving Canada for an extended period of time, ultimately becoming a non-resident of Canada, keep in mind that Wealthsimple actually does not support or offer non-resident accounts, whereas Questrade actually does. So, you know, do your research and see which account, or which platform I should say, works best for you. All right, guys, so that's a wrap on this video. I really hope that you guys enjoyed hearing another update within our investing journey. And yeah, let us know in the comments below which investment platform you use. And yeah, we'll see you next week with another video.